jumped. Maria joins us now. Thanks very much for being with us on Afternoon Briefing.
Thank you for having me again.
Do you still think nuclear is the wrong way for the Liberal Party to go?
Well, let me be clear about what I spoke about. I spoke about the policy that we took to the last election, which related to state-owned nuclear power plants around our country. I don't believe that that is something that Australians consider to be a credible policy in terms of addressing climate change and in terms of reducing emissions. I have very clearly said that I do believe that we should lift the moratorium on nuclear, that as a Liberal, I believe that we should allow markets to make a determination about any emerging technology or opportunity. And in that sense, if the market sees that there are some viable emerging technologies in relation to nuclear, then that's something that we would look at.
What we've heard from Dan Tehan since his return from this trip, though, is he was saying it's his strong view that nuclear should be part of the energy mix. That sounds quite different from the vision you have, which is let the market decide what the energy source should be.
Well, let me be clear, we haven't determined what our policy is yet, and I think that the visit that our Shadow Minister Dan Tehan took in relation to having a look at what our contemporaries are doing is something really important. Our leader Susan Lee has been very clear that we are going to listen, we're going to learn, and then we're going to develop policies that will be something that we can take to the next election. We're in 2025. The next election is in 2028. We are going to be robust and deliberate in the development of our policies so that we ensure that what we are delivering to the Australian people, so that they can look at us as an alternative government, is actually credible and has been well developed. So Dan is right to do that research. And let's be clear, we shouldn't be closing the door on any emerging technology. We should actually look at everything and say, yeah, that's worth considering, that's worth looking at. And that's something that we need in order to build out a policy that doesn't just work in 2028, that doesn't just work for 2035, that doesn't just work for 2050, but something that builds for future generations so that we actually leave our country and our planet better off for our children, right, and don't leave them a burden that's unnecessary.
So you're saying that this needs to be something to consider when you go about formulating the policy, and Dan Tehan is leading that policy review, but he seems to have already made a decision that this is something that should be part of the mix. From the outside, it looks like he's made a very clear determination that it should be part of the mix, whereas you're saying it's still something the party's considering. So what is it?
Well, I'm not going to reflect on what somebody else is thinking, and I don't think you can expect me to do that. What I'm telling you is what our process is, and we are undertaking that process in a very clear and transparent way. And I think that that's what Australians expect from us. They expect us to do that, and we will continue to do that. The Prime Minister promised a number of things to Australians. He promised that there would be more housing. He promised that there would be lower taxes. He promised that you could go to the doctor with just your Medicare card. And he promised that we would have lower electricity bills. None of those have transpired. But perhaps the most egregious of all of those are the problems with housing and energy. Australians are not paying $275 less. They're paying $1,300 more. The average Australian with a mortgage is paying $1,800 a month more. We would be negligent if we were not exploring all the options in relation to all of these significant problems.
The option that's being explored here is nuclear technology. The transition we're seeing in the electricity grid, the exit of coal from the grid, is happening over the next 10 years. Nuclear is mooted by the coalition in the past as a replacement for that. There's no way that can be in place in the next 10 years. So how is nuclear a viable option to support reduction of power prices in the next 10 years when it's not feasible to construct that in a decade time frame?
Well, that's a characterisation that you've made about what our policy may or may not look like.
That's the best indicator that we've got when the minister in charge doing the review has said it's his strong view that it should be part of the mix. I mean, I'm not exactly willfully misinterpreting his words. It's literally what he said.
Well, respectfully, Mel, if you want to continue that conversation, I suggest you have Dan Tehan on your show. What I'm saying to you is what our process is and what we're going to do. unlike the government, we are not going to be ideological about what an energy policy and an energy mix should look like. Absolutely, renewables are a core part of that. I've spoken about that before. We have had state governments around the country now talk about gas. Gas is going to have to be an important part of that mix as well. What we are saying, and what I have said, if there are technologies available for the future for us to be able to deliver clean energy, to decarbonise, to do our part in the global effort, why would we not look at that? Why would we close the door on a conversation or even on a discussion or a broader policy review? I think Australians expect a little bit more than that.
We have members of the Liberal Party like Andrew Hastie who have been very vocal in making the case for not continuing with the commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050. If the party adopted that plan, what do you think that would do to the electoral position of the Liberal Party?
Well, I think that Australians have been very clear on their views in relation to climate change, decarbonisation and the reduction of emissions. They sent that message to us very, very clearly on the election on the 3rd of May, and we've heard that clearly.
Is it helpful to have colleagues making the case publicly while the formal review process that Dan Tehan is leading is taking place?
Well, it's part of our process, and we're having those discussions openly and transparently, and I think that's fair enough. I don't think that we are expected to actually just silently develop things in the background. I think it's important to ventilate. That's part of talking and listening. Our leader, as I've said many times, Susan Lee, has said we are going to listen. So that is not just listening in particular echo chambers, that's listening to a broad spectrum of views on core issues. And we can't be afraid of that. We can't be afraid of hearing things that are both uncomfortable and perhaps things that might be different to what we want to hear. That's part of our job. It's important that we do that. We don't exist in an echo chamber. In this job, we have to listen to what Australians are worried about, what their needs are, what their aspirations are, and from that we have to be able to develop workable policies that will deliver the right outcomes for our country.
Can I ask you about another issue? We're seeing plenty of frustration between the state and territory governments and the federal government when it comes to public hospital funding, which of course has a number of related issues, including foundational supports for the NDIS, aged care and the impacts of elderly Australians in public hospitals is caught up in that negotiation as well. But we've seen the New South Wales government and others be very frustrated at the federal government, saying the offers that are being put forward aren't sufficient. Do you think that it is possible to see a resolution to this by the end of the year? And how important is it for state and federal governments to be able to come to an agreement on this funding deal?
That's such an important question and such an important issue. I think it's unlikely that it will happen by the end of the year. I think that Premier Chris Minns has ventilated his frustration very, very clearly today at the Prime Minister. I think what's really striking here is we have a Labor Premier and a Labor Prime Minister who are unable to come to an agreement or come to an understanding or a clarity on direction. This was meant to be done and dusted and ready to go from the 1st of July this year. Hasn't happened. Today we have disagreements between the Prime Minister and the Premier as to what's happening, not too dissimilar to the narrative and the stories we heard a month or so ago in relation to the NDIS. Minister Butler got up and spoke about some stuff that the Premiers had no idea about. So once again, this Prime Minister and this federal government seem to be doing what they want without discussing key matters, critical matters such as hospital funding with the states.
We do regularly see very hard-fought negotiations between the states and territories and the Commonwealth, regardless of who's in government. We know that it's a lot of money that is at stake, and therefore you do have some tough negotiations that take place. So is this not just the sort of brinksmanship that comes with difficult negotiations? Is this really any different from negotiations we've seen over public health funding in the past?
I think it is different because the federal government hasn't met its timeline of having this rolled out by the 1st of July. And here we are in October and it's still going. We've got, 12 weeks or so until Christmas. The reality is it's highly unlikely that the government will be able to deliver on this. And what I would really like to know is, are they going to meet their funding commitment of funding 42.5% of the cost of public hospitals? Are they going to do that? Or is this going to be another broken promise of the Albanese Labor government? I suspect that that is what the problem is here.
All right, Maria Kovacic, we've covered a bit of ground there. I appreciate you coming on the program this afternoon. Thanks very much.
Thank you.